Good evening, and welcome to the evening from the New York Times. I'm your host, and today is Friday, August 14th, 2026. We've got a full briefing tonight, stretching from a Manhattan courtroom where a high-profile defendant finally spoke, to the mountains of Japan where his path was traced, to a London home where a rising academic star's life came to a sudden end. We'll look at a Senate race in Alaska where a Democrat is turning away a former vice president's help, a Times investigation into Russian election interference in Moldova that reads like a spy novel, and a Supreme Court docket that now includes a dog named Bruce. Later, we'll unwind with a 36-year journey from a typewriter to the silver screen, a reader's revolt over the best thrillers of the century, and South Dakota's beloved steak Nosh Chislik. Let's begin. In a Manhattan federal courtroom this afternoon, Luigi Mangione, 28, sat in ankle shackles and showed little emotion as he pleaded guilty to a pair of federal stalking charges tied to the December 2024 killing of Brian Thompson, the chief executive of United Healthcare. The hearing was brief, just a few minutes, but it was the first time the public had heard from Mangione since the shooting outside a Midtown hotel. "I shot Mr. Thompson," he said plainly. He added, "I knew what I was doing was illegal." He acknowledged that the weapon was a gun he had made using a 3D printer. Thompson's family sat in the front row. Prosecutors said they would seek a life sentence. Mangione's sentencing is set for December 18th. But this federal plea is only half the legal picture. Mangione still faces a separate murder charge in New York State Court, with a trial scheduled for next month. His lawyers indicated they would seek to dismiss that indictment on double jeopardy grounds, arguing he cannot be tried twice for the same offense. Legal experts say exceptions might apply, given the dual sovereignty doctrine that allows state and federal prosecutions for the same conduct. The two powerful prosecutor offices, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District and the Manhattan District Attorney, have been on something of a collision course over this case, and today's plea sharpens that tension. The case has riveted the country in ways that go beyond the courtroom. Many Americans were shocked by what appeared to be a brazen, targeted assassination of a healthcare executive. But others expressed a grim sympathy for what they described as Mangione's deep anger at the health insurance industry. Since Thompson's killing, that anger has only intensified. Rising premiums, medical debt, and the sprawling reach of conglomerates like United Health Group, which owns United Healthcare, the pharmacy benefit manager OptumRx, and vast physician networks, have turned the murder into a kind of cultural flashpoint. The outrage isn't fading. It's solidifying into a broader mistrust of the entire system. Who was Luigi Mangione before that December morning? My colleagues at the Times spent months tracing his pivotal missing months. They followed a trail that led from beers at a Bangkok bar to a grueling climb up Mount Omine in Japan, a sacred peak that has drawn spiritual pilgrims for over 1,000 years. In May 2024, Mangione stayed in a small guesthouse in the village of Tenkoa, deep in the lush mountains of the Kii Peninsula. He was alone, hiking, writing, searching. The reporting paints a portrait of a young man from a prominent Maryland family, a valedictorian and Ivy League graduate, who seemed to unspool in slow motion, physically ailing, intellectually restless, increasingly isolated. It's a story that doesn't excuse what happened, but it complicates the caricature. Now we turn across the Atlantic, to London, where another complicated story reached a tragic endpoint today. A 41-year-old man was found dead at a South London residence connected to Jason Ardie, the Cambridge University scholar whose meteoric rise was followed by a dizzying fall. The Metropolitan Police have not formally confirmed the identity, but the age matches Ardie's, and British outlets are reporting it is him. His family released a statement saying, Jason was subjected to a campaign of sustained abuse in the years since he accepted the Cambridge role. The campaign of misinformation was too much for Jason, who was a gentleman and who always wanted to see the best in everyone. Just last week, Ardie resigned from Cambridge amid a storm of allegations. The university had announced an investigation into claims that he plagiarized parts of his academic papers, embellished his recently published memoir, and fabricated elements of his life story. He had been hired in 2023 as the youngest black professor in Cambridge's history, a landmark appointment celebrated widely. But doubts began to surface about his academic qualifications and the personal narrative he had woven into his public persona. In his resignation statement, Ardie wrote, "I no longer wish to feel as though I am living under a constant spotlight, where every aspect of my life is subject to public examination and judgment." It was a spotlight that, in the end, proved unbearable. From London to Alaska, where the political calculus is just as unforgiving. Mary Peltola, a Democrat and former representative, is running for the Senate in a state that Donald Trump won handily and where Kamala Harris lost by 14 percentage points in the 2024 presidential election. To win, Peltola will have to vastly outperform the top of the ticket. So when Harris signed a fundraising email from her PAC supporting Peltola this week, Republicans saw an opening and pounced. Peltola's campaign moved with striking speed. They said the appeal had not been approved, and they did not want the former vice president's endorsement. It was a blunt, public rebuke, a signal that in red state Democrats' playbook, national figures can be more liability than asset. In other political money news, a Times analysis finds that members of Congress and their families have collectively traded well over $100 million in individual stocks this term, somewhere between $160 million and $664 million, according to financial disclosures. Roughly a quarter of legislators have traded, some in the millions, renewing pressure for a ban on congressional stock trading. Now, a story that feels like it was pulled from the Cold War, except it's happening right now. Months ago, Vladimir Putin gathered Russian leaders for a secret briefing. Their goal for 2026, he said, was the collapse of NATO and the EU from within. At the center of that effort, Moldova, a tiny nation bordering Ukraine. A sweeping Times investigation by Michael Schwartz, Adam Goldman, and Aaron Krolik reveals an audacious Kremlin campaign to derail Moldova's pro-Western government. It included training camps run by Russian spies disguised as summer camps, complete with barbecues, beach volleyball, and a wellness spa called Relax and Have Fun, where Moldovan citizens were schooled in election interference. There was a sophisticated vote-buying scheme, and Moscow even paid Orthodox priests to sway their congregations. It almost worked. Pro-Western forces barely squeaked by in recent elections. As one Moldovan official put it, we won the battle. But we did not win the war. You can hear more on today's episode of The Daily, which explores a Russian spy network in Japan. Let's run through more top news. The Trump administration asked the Supreme Court today to allow construction to proceed on the president's planned 90,000 square foot ballroom, a $400 million project to replace the demolished East Wing. The courts have let building continue even while questioning the project's legality. In Washington, a Kentucky woman, Melissa Ferris, 41, was charged with 2 federal felonies after U.S. Park Police said they observed her spray painting the World War II memorial. She faces up to 10 years. The economy flashed a warning. Retail sales fell 0.6% in July, the biggest drop in more than a year, as consumers pulled back at gas stations, auto dealers, electronics stores, and even online, though economists note Amazon Prime Day's shift complicates the e-commerce picture. In Afghanistan, 5 years after the Taliban drove the U.S. out, the foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, told the Times in Kabul that they want the Americans back with diplomats and investment, but no military. We consider the chapter of war to have come to an end, he said. Analysts call it a near-impossible sell for Washington. At the Supreme Court, the emergency docket keeps growing. This week, the justices received a filing on behalf of a dog named Bruce, a 120-pound, 3-year-old Anatolian Shepherd detained in Ventura County, California, and ordered euthanized after a state court found him vicious. It may be the first emergency appeal for a canine. The court has been inundated with emergency requests from all manner of petitioners trying to leapfrog lower courts. In lighter fare, Brad Pitt told Esquire he's drinking again in moderation after 7 years sober. He quit in 2016, the year his marriage to Angelina Jolie collapsed. His disclosure revived an old, unsettled debate: can someone who once drank dangerously ever drink safely again? Experts say it's not inherently unsafe, but it's a high-wire act. And in the art world, a happy ending: 5 people have been arrested in works by Cezanne, Renoir, and Matisse stolen in a brazen 3-minute heist near Parma this spring have been recovered. The Carabinieri tracked the thieves through clues at the scene in wiretaps. The art is worth at least $10 million. Time for the evening quiz. Bob Iger, who led Disney as CEO for most of the 21st century, is set to become an owner of which sports team? The options: Boston Bruins, Dallas Wings, Los Angeles Lakers, New York Yankees. The answer, as reported by Brooks Barnes and Tanya Ganguly, the Los Angeles Lakers. Iger and venture capitalist Joshua Kushner are buying the franchise. Their wives Willow Bay and Carly Kloss set them up. It started socially, over Estee Lauder connections, and evolved into a billion-dollar partnership. Now, time to unwind. In 1990, humorist Ian Fraser sat at his Olympia manual typewriter and tapped out a 1,600-word story, a legal brief by Wile Coyote against the Acme Corporation, whose products rocket skates, giant rubber bands, birdseed laced with ion pellets had failed him again and again in his pursuit of the Roadrunner. 36 years later, a movie based on that story arrives in theaters this month. The saga included several expired deals, multiple drafts, and a 3-year delay that let the studio take a $30 million tax write-down. When Frazier finally got his check, he bought a Toyota Camry hybrid. "I have never loved an object that much," he said. Our list of the 50 best thrillers of the 21st century drew hundreds of reader responses, some with alternate picks, some arguing over what even counts as a thriller. So we turned it over to you. The new reader-chosen list extends to 100 titles. Tana French anchors the backbone with 9 novels. John le Carre, Kate Atkinson, and Mick Herron each have 5. Readers from Vancouver to New York wait in, praising French, asking where Lee Child is. Our book review editor also breaks down what makes a great opening line for a thriller. Dinner table topics tonight: AI chatbots are pushing us toward a post-human internet. When the bots start talking to each other, what happens to us? Tech mogul Brian Johnson thinks we can outrun death. He explains his blueprint for a 150-year life on the latest Interesting Times podcast. A hairdresser predicted a marriage before the first date and was right. And you can pick your favorite summer house in Iceland. What to do this weekend? Bake a beautifully simple apple and plum crustade. Stream the Schmigadoon cast album. It won Best New Musical, Book, and Score at the 2026 Tonys. Listen to Phoebe Bridgers' new album, Lost Weekend. Our critic calls it marvelous, death-haunted, and the best of her career. Keep your lips moist with Wirecutter's recommended bombs. Take the news quiz. Play connections, spelling bee, and the mini crossword. And one last thing, Chislik. On a recent trip to Denver, Nancy Krulin, a retired teacher, was surprised to find no restaurant serving it. Back home in South Dakota, it's a staple: skewered mutton bites, fried, served with garlic salt, saltines, and a cold beer. Officially named the state nosh in 2018, Chislik has grown more popular and more varied: beef instead of mutton, griddle instead of deep fryer, sometimes no skewer at all. But it has hardly crossed state lines. So if you're in South Dakota, order a plate. Have a savory weekend. That's the evening for Friday, August 14, 2026. I'll be back on Monday. Thanks for listening.